reducing collisions, strategies for accident prevention, and technologies that will help waste and recycling companies reduce their preventable crashes. Before we begin, to avoid background noise, like I mentioned, all of our attendees, the attendees of the call, your phones have been muted. You should, like I said, see a chat box on your screen. If you have any specific questions come up during the presentation, please feel free to type it in so that the panelists can see it. At the end of the presentation, we're going to hold a Q&A portion to answer any of the questions that we have. Your speakers today include Del Lisk. Del is the Vice President of Safety Services for Lytics Incorporated, and Robert Scott Franklin, who's the Area Safety Manager for Waste Management. I'll go ahead and kick off the presentation with a little background information about NWRA. NWRA has 30 chapters in 29 states. We have over 700 companies who are our members, and all the employees in those companies are also members based on their company's membership. We serve virtually every community in the United States that processes more than 2/3 of the waste and recycling in the industry. This event that we're hosting today is really part of the safety initiatives and the safety processes that we have in place here at NWRA that really kind of support safety functions in our at our chapter levels and for our members and for the industry as a whole. We do have a number of resources available to NWRA, like our federal, state, and local advocacy programs, landfill and healthcare waste institutes, recycling committees, and our ANSI Standards Secretariat. We write the standards for the industry as far as the American National Standards Institute's standards are concerned. Next slide. Part of our strategic initiatives are to achieve 0 fatalities and 0 incidents. It's possible in the waste and recycling industry to achieve this, and we as a membership association and an industry cannot accept and settle for anything less than this. So one of our strategic initiatives is to move the refuse and recyclable materials collectors off of the OSHA Top 10 Most Dangerous Occupations list. And some of the programs and strategies we have to achieve that are in relation to building stronger safety cultures, providing material for our members and for the industry, utilizing data-driven solutions to achieve and identify what our issues are. We are, like I said, we are the ANSI Secretariat and leveraging that Secretariat for the standards and its capabilities. We also are providing training resources to the chapter level, which is what this webinar is about, also delivering safety content in useful formats. And as you'll see as the presentation goes on, this is very useful information that can quite honestly be lifted and shifted into any organization to develop better business practices and safety programs. We are taking a joint actions that will significantly reduce distracted driving. Again, this webinar kind of fits right into that as well. And we're building and creating collaborative opportunities to leverage our efforts with other industry associations like SWANA and ISRI and other business partners from the industry, from manufacturing, and from other companies that are members of our association. To get us started, our first subject matter expert panelist today is Scott Franklin. He's the Area Safety Manager for Waste Management. Scott's responsible for the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia market. That's a mouthful. Market area where he oversees 91 sites, 1,600 trucks, over 1,600 trucks, 125 pieces of yellow iron, and 4,000 employees. Prior to his employment with Waste Management, Scott was a law enforcement officer in Virginia Beach for 23 years. During his tenure with Virginia Beach, Scott served as a member of the motor carrier unit and the fatal crash team. Scott is a professional crash reconstructionist and a federal motor carrier inspector. Scott, would you like to say a few words before Dell's presentation about how your experience as a crash reconstructionist has helped to improve driver behaviors to reduce collisions at Waste Management?
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Tony, and thank you for allowing me to speak in front of your panel here. When coming from law enforcement for 23 years, throwing myself into the transportation safety industry, I had a significant level of experience But I had to come into this with my eyes wide open and have a practical skill set on what I could offer waste management to drive down our crashes and to drive down our preventables. So I went in again with my eyes wide open, and what I looked at was, through my training and experience, a lot of the commercial vehicle crashes that I worked previously was not the first time that driver had been involved in an incident. So therefore, when I came to waste management, we have charts and programs that we identify our multiple incident employees. What I've found, much like this, and probably to no surprise, that the people who were causing the majority of our crashes at our location were our multiple incident employees. Then what did we have to do? We had to look at that and say, well, is it because of lack of training, or is it because they're not good drivers, or what have you? So I started digging into that and creating a transition period with my reconstruction background and my motor carrier background to start getting out in front of the managers and to facilitate manager training success, which allowed them to have the confidence to get out in front of their drivers to drive down our previous incidents. And by that, each driver has an observation, whether it's an in-cab or whether it's where the route managers get behind the truck and follow the truck for a significant period of time. So what I was able to do with my experience is put these programs into place, and we have been very successful in simply giving the managers what they need to get out and talk to the drivers, have that confidence to you know, a lot of our managers are not commercial drivers. Therefore, they get out in front of their people now, and we have gone and significantly reduced our risks out in the community. I mean, let's face it, Waste Management has 25,000 trucks a day on the road, and there's only 18 safety managers for the entire company. I'm one of 18. So as we get together and move forward, I'm glad that Dell was on the call. I've listened to Dell speak many times, very profound, very, very, very great expert to have in this industry. And, you know, we have 25,000 cameras from DriveCam, and I'm here to tell you that it does force driver behavior to change. And that is the perfect for what I come out of my career into, looking for something that's going to force the change of driver behavior. Because we can prevent, just like you said, these incidents. It's hard to prevent when we are sitting stopped at a red light and someone else is distracted and hits us in the rear. But I hate to hear on our calls, you know, non-preventable or they hit us. Well, is there something else that we can do? And that's what I drive into, and Dell's programs allow me to do that. I appreciate your time. Like I told you before, I've got to drop off just for a few minutes, but I'll come back and be involved in the Q&A session and the majority of the rest of the training. But thank you very much for giving me this time.
Thank you very much, Scott. And Scott, well, like Scott said, he'll be available at the end for the, and he knows the presentation as well, so he's seen it. But he'll be available at the end for Q&A as well. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that what Scott mentioned there was that all levels of your leadership organization need to understand what those behaviors are that need to be driven by the driver, by the drivers, and need to be enforced to those drivers, so that the leadership folks understand what that function is that those drivers are operating. And a system like DriveCam and allows management to see those behaviors in action and coach them and understand more about that driving skill itself, so that they can lead and also be able to assess what the preventability or non-preventable of a crash itself. So again, that was great information. Thank you, Scott. Our next presenter is Del Lisk. Del is the Vice President of Safety at Lytx. In his role, he serves as Lytx's Chief Safety and Training Liaison for its more than 950 fleet customers. Additional duties include developing and improving the DriveCam program's driver risk analysis process, which is a lot of what you heard Scott just mention as well. As a byproduct of his role, he's reviewed video in several thousand risky driving events and analyzed hundreds of traffic collisions. Del is a certified transportation professional and an active member in several motor vehicle safety groups, such as the National Safety Council's Transportation Safety Division and the American Society of Safety Engineers Transportation Practices Specialty. Del, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Tony, and thanks to Scott. I look forward to having him joining us a little bit later on. And most of all, thanks for everyone for joining this webinar here. So, you know, none of us have a lot of free time, so I want to make sure that this time is useful to you. So, along with presenting the information I will be presenting, would really encourage any questions you have that occur during the presentation. Be sure to just type into the chat box, and we'll tackle them right afterwards. As a very brief background, I've been involved in fleet safety for about 34 years now. Used to run a company that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Smith System, the driver training company. I was the president of that company for many, many years until I came across this funky little in-cab video technology called DriveCam back in 2003. And we sold Smith, and I joined DriveCam in 2003. So I've been with DriveCam, which is now called Lytx, for about 13 years. And that's a lot of what I want to share with you today. So no surprise here, you know, an important goal for any fleet is to drive down the frequency and severity of preventable collisions. So that's really what this session is about. So I'm really focusing on the preventable collisions, not the stuff that you really couldn't do anything about. And just about everything I'll be revealing here is talking to that. So some of the things I'll cover are, you know, what percentage of waste industry collisions are preventable? What are the most common types of preventable collisions? Which preventable collisions tend to be more or less severe? What are the most common causes of preventable collisions? And is preoccupation with a cell phone the biggest issue? And then we'll kind of go over some final takeaways after that. So first of all, and there's certainly different definitions out there, but I thought I'd at least kind of kick things off with just presenting at least one version of definitions of what a preventable collision is and a non-preventable collision. And this is from the National Safety Council. So the preventable collision is one in which the driver failed to do everything that they reasonably could have done to avoid it. And then a non-preventable collision, it says every accident in which a driver is involved shall be considered preventable unless there was no action which the driver could have reasonably taken to avoid the accident, and that his or her actions in no way contributed to the occurrence of that accident. So if you look at these two definitions here, I think certainly a takeaway from it is that in general, probably more collisions than not are probably preventable if you're using this definition as sort of your guideline. And in looking at collisions, so what I did is I looked at several hundred videos of collisions from the industry that we have on our database, and that's the data that I'll be presenting now. So when I did look at these collision videos, about 71% of them, the subject was preventable. That doesn't mean it was their fault. The other person may have violated the law, but there's something they reasonably could have done to have avoided involvement in that incident. However, I know when I sometimes talk with fleets that are out there, I tend to hear different numbers from some of them. Some fleets will report that 50 to 70% of their vehicle incidents are actually non-preventable, which seems to be a little bit in conflict with what I saw here. Now, there's no doubt reasons for that. One may be that some managers may confuse the concept of a preventable with being at fault. Again, many times we weren't at fault, but we might have been able to do something to avoid it. Or they may be making assessments based on limited information. Maybe they don't have the luxury of having a video clip or some of the other data, and they're just simply relying on driver testimony and maybe other witnesses, which can be, as you guys know, can be all over the map. And then, of course, managers may feel pressured to protect the drivers or feel pressure to kind of make the numbers look a little better than they really are. So those sorts of things can cause some perhaps skewed information about preventable versus non-preventable. So this is just a couple of still shots, but I wanted to just kind of talk to this a little bit to further expand on the idea of at fault versus preventable collision. So on the image to the left of the screen, we have a car oncoming that is clearly already showing they're starting to cross over the center line. What they want to do is they're turning across the road into a driveway or something like that. But you can see it, you know, a couple hundred feet back. Later on, you know, a few seconds ahead, that's the right slot. If you look at the right frame, what you see is our vehicle, the one that's about to run into the vehicle that's crossing their path. Our vehicle really made no adjustments whatsoever until that other vehicle was literally right in front of the windshield. And at that point, they instinctively made a little bit of a swerve and jammed on the brakes. But it was too late, and it was a collision. Now, was the other person at fault, the person cutting across the roadway? Absolutely, no question whatsoever. And you know, any reports by law enforcement and any financial costs involved with this certainly should be pushed back to that other party, beyond question. But in this particular incident, our driver actually had the clues, the ability to see the problem forming approximately 3 seconds before, and yet they did nothing at all about it. So this is one where, with a little better advanced awareness of the situation ahead, they would have had time to safely apply the brakes and have an opportunity to perhaps avoid this altogether. That's kind of the difference between at fault and preventable. So I wanted to next look at preventable collisions in the waste industry. So here's a chart. This is looking at preventable collisions and just breaking them out by different types and the frequency. And probably no surprise at all to you is that high on the frequency list is waste trucks hitting fixed objects and also backing. So if you add those two together, it's almost 40% of all the preventable collisions involve the trucks hitting some kind of fixed object or backing up. So those happen a lot, but they're generally not very severe. They're not a lot of dollars, but they are pretty frequent. In number two, in second place, is rear-end collisions, and that means, in other words, one of our waste trucks running into the back of someone else. So that was a little over 20% of the preventable collisions. And of course, one of the problems there in a waste vehicle, we're talking about a very heavy, large vehicle, and typically when they run into another vehicle, into the back of another vehicle, unfortunately, that's going to be a pretty high severity incident just because of the weight of the vehicle. So let's go ahead and launch a video to kind of demonstrate an example of one of those rear-end collisions. Probably a little ironic that it ran into another waste vehicle. So this one, fortunately, was a lower severity one because it's two heavy vehicles. But when this one, because the driver was following too close, when the other vehicle stopped for the next set of cans, they couldn't stop in time. That's a kind of rear-end collisions that we were looking at. However, the collision frequency really isn't the only consideration. So this is just kind of a fictitious example to make the point. So what we have here is a company I've labeled Acme Sanitation. I sincerely hope there isn't actually a company online here listening to this by that name. Not trying to point any fingers. This is again fictitious here. So Acme Sanitation, in this example, from 2011 to 2016, if you look at the bar graph, they've actually reduced their preventable collisions by 54%. Looks like good news. Unfortunately, at the same time, if you look at the red trend line, the costs of their incidents have more than doubled over that same time period. And worse yet, in 2011 they had 1 fatality, and in 2016 they've had 6 fatalities. So this is hardly the kind of thing that your boss would be patting you on the back for. So again, just to kind of demonstrate that understanding what's happening with your fleet is a lot more than just measuring frequency. Severity, it plays a heavy part of that look too. So let's look at collision severity a little closer in the waste industry. And the way that I did it here is when we looked at the crash video clips, we put them into 4 different categories. The ones that were categorized as a level 1, that was the most severe incidents. So those were ones where the airbag was deployed or an injury was likely. So for example, if the waste truck hit another vehicle that was then pushed into a third vehicle, those we would consider that an injury was likely, and that would have been put as a level 1 event. A level 2 event, still fairly high severity, it's one where vehicle may have been disabled, a police report was likely, but it was probably just property damage. A level 3 is one that was probably not police reported, fairly minor damage to one or the other vehicle, and generally probably less than $5,000 in damages. And that would be a lower severity incident. And then level 4 was instances where it's just a single vehicle, kind of a low force, and that'd be things like, again, them clipping a pole as they're driving through the yard, knocking a mailbox down, those sorts of things. So just property damage only. We consider those a level 4 low severity event. So here's one look at that. So with this, we took a look at different types of preventable collisions and their severity. And what you see here, again, we already knew that fixed objects and backing were very common incidences. If you look at the kind of the blue-purple color, which is the level 4, the lowest severity, we see that the vast majority of fixed object and backing incidences are generally pretty low severity. No real surprises there. If we look at the rear-end collisions, side swipes, and intersections, those are ones that were most commonly higher severity. So these were 3 that tended to be higher severity. So the green and the orange are the higher severity incidences. And we see with rear-end collisions, side swipes, and intersections, the majority of those were fairly high severity. Now, rollovers don't happen very often, fortunately, but when they do happen, they're usually very severe. So the ones that we looked at in this database, the ones that did happen were the highest level of severity, level 1 types of events. Let's go ahead and look at an example of a rollover. And as you can see in this one, a cell phone comes into play on this. The driver was distracted by the cell phone and drifted off the road and then overcorrected. So this is an example of one of those level 1 high severity events that we looked at. Luckily, the driver had a seatbelt on, so at least as far as physical damages to the driver, probably relatively minimal. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So on this next view, this is a closer look at those low severity collisions. The majority of those incidences were related to bad judgments, such as misjudging clearances, also awareness issues such as poor mirror use while backing, failing to fully scan the area, and striking a fixed object, or simply not looking very far ahead and running into an object in front. Too fast for conditions was also another big factor here. And by this, we're not saying that they were going over the speed limit or anything like that, but they were simply going too fast to safely negotiate a tight spot or to deal with weather conditions, that sort of thing. It may be a little surprising, but if you look at the 4th from the left, it says watching rear of truck. Now this was evident in about 10% of those low severity crashes. And by watching rear of truck, what I'm referring to is a tendency for drivers as they pick up a load and they start to move forward to go to the next task, next job task. Many drivers tend to look in that side mirror, looking up to the top edge of that side mirror to see if there's any refuse falling off, making sure everything's secure, that debris, make sure debris wasn't falling off. So they'd be doing that action as they're moving forward, and they'd hit something else. So that was evident in about 10% of those low severity collisions. Now, it might be surprising to you that cell phones were a fairly low involvement in these low severity collisions. It was less than 5% of the low severity collisions, which again might take you by surprise. I think what this is because the majority of these low severity instances tended to occur when a driver was engaged in some kind of work activity, whether it was packing a load or driving through the yard, places like that. They were too busy to be on the phone. And again, as I mentioned, that watching the rear of the truck and then moving forward, that was in about 10% of those low severity incidences. Sounds like a training issue there, perhaps. So here's an example of, one of the labels was looking away from the forward view. So here's an example of that. And with this one, I didn't use a clip from the waste industry, but rather my sons were kind enough to volunteer for this one. So these are, just wanted to introduce you to my son Cameron behind the wheel and his brother Alex. They were leaving high school, end of day, kind of waiting to go out of the parking lot with everyone else. And just what simply happened is Cameron simply glanced over to see a friend and wave at a friend, and at that exact same time, the vehicle had stopped, and they couldn't stop in time. So that's when we're saying look away from forward view. That's what we're referring to. Now, in terms of that video, I have the rights to play that one because I paid about $3,000 for it. So anyway, it's mine now. Okay. Here's a closer look at high severity incidences. And so awareness, driver awareness really was the biggest factor. Again, we talked about that look away from forward view, not looking far ahead. Poor mirror usage were just a handful of those. So awareness was really the most common issue. It might be surprising, but in this case, drowsy driving came up to about 8% of the incidences. If you recall, in the low severity incidences, it really was a non-factor, but it's about 8% of the higher severity incidences. So fatigue is an issue in the waste industry for sure. Poor following distance was of course a factor in many of the rear-end collisions that we have here too. Now another thing, remember, if you recall, the cell phone use was a fairly low percentage of incidences in the low severity instances. However, it's a significantly higher amount, about 50% more evident in the higher severity incidences. So in terms of cell phones, the issue isn't that it's whether or not it's, I mean, it is definitely an issue, and the biggest part of it is that it doesn't happen all that often in the waste industry from our view. However, when it does happen, it leads to some very bad consequences, unfortunately. Also, looking at this chart, you can see that the distractions really do come in a lot of different forms. It's not just being on the cell phone. It could be a driver involved with adjusting equipment on the vehicle. We already mentioned just simply looking away from the forward view. There's lots of forms of distraction. So here's an example of a high severity crash. We'll go ahead and play this video. So in this video, in this video, the truck ahead that drifts off the road and hits the trailer, we'll never know. That wasn't the camera view that we have, so we'll never know what happened with that driver, and the cause of it for that truck driver. But very likely, either distractions or fatigue are very likely the cause of that. In terms of our driver, so what you have there is that lead truck that ran into the trailer. Obviously, that was a preventable collision. Our driver that was ultimately capturing the video from their truck was something that was non-preventable from their perspective. Really nothing they could do. They just jammed on the brakes and tried to avoid it the best they possibly could, but it was simply no room to do so. So the last thing I wanted to do is take a look specifically at driver distractions. And as I mentioned, there's many types of driver distractions. Of course, there's the cell phone and of course the hands-free. If you have a crew, you might have passenger distractions. There's also operational distractions, such as the driver operating vehicle equipment. And there can be in-cab distractions, such as handling paperwork, reaching for an object. In your industry, I've often seen people who pick up something that was being thrown away and they put it in the cab of the vehicle, and it's not designed to be held by the cab, and it's literally impeding the driving. Of course, eating or drinking while driving, grooming. And even, of course, daydreaming can be. Those are all different types of driver distractions. So here is a closer look at that. So if we look at this, what we see is cell phone use was a factor in about 6% of the, if you remember, it was involved in about 6% of the preventable collisions, but in a higher percentage of the higher severity incidences. However, if we look at just distractions, just that group of events themselves, cell phones were about 1 out of every 4 distracted driving events. And of course, with these cell phone ones, these are willful violations of the law. They know they're not supposed to do it. I'm quite certain that everyone on the webinar right now, I'm quite certain that you have a policy that doesn't permit it in the vehicles. So it's also a willful violation of your policy. So that's about 1 out of every 4. But that leaves over 70% of these preventable collisions where distraction was involved. I mean, that other 70% were things that were work-related, or just a driver with their attention to the wrong thing. So here's a few takeaways. One is most collisions in the waste industry are preventable, and this is actually good news because that's an opportunity. If most of them were non-preventable, it's essentially saying there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But there's a lot of opportunity to improve, so that's the good news. Incident severity should be considered, not just incident frequency. Distractions come in many forms. Often drivers concentrate on the rear of the truck as they're moving forward. So this certainly is, again, this is a training issue. It may well be that some drivers, when they come on board, that particular trainers put a lot of focus on that, making sure that driver understands they need to have everything secure on top and debris not falling off. Maybe it's promoted to the extent that takes a priority over the driving when they start moving again. And so we need to perhaps revisit that. Because drivers need to visually dismiss work functions once they begin to move forward. Cell phone use is a relatively minor factor in waste industry collisions overall, but it's a major factor in the higher severity crashes. And driver falling asleep was present in almost 8% of the higher severity crashes. And I find this a little surprising. You certainly would expect it in industries like over-the-road trucking, where they do a lot of driving, kind of continuous driving, and there's a lot of tedium there. But in the waste industry, where drivers are more actively getting in and out, a little surprised to see the number that high. So it's an issue. And one thing I want to put on the table, if it isn't already on your table, is consider implementing a fatigue management plan. And one place, if you go to nfmp.org, there's a free plan you can download there. That was something that's put together by Canadian and U.S. authorities together, and it's a really good starting point. But take a look at that, and if you don't have any current fatigue management plan, take a look at that and see if you want to borrow aspects from that for your own purposes. I would highly recommend you at least take a look. And then finally, it's important to reinforce the critical safe driving skills of proper following distance, active scanning. But of course, just teaching it to them and training isn't enough. You need to have some method of ensuring that they're actually using it as they're driving your vehicles down the road. As just kind of a closing comment on my presentation portion, and I'm sure you all feel the same, our job is to ensure that employees return home in the same condition that they come to work, and that's what this is all intended for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Del, for this information. I think it's phenomenal for folks to understand that that there are processes available to help companies see and acknowledge actually what their drivers are doing, real time, for the most part. The data pretty much speaks for itself in this case, because we're all dealing with a lot of the same issues in our industry as well as other industries that are dealing with like route delivery or local driver work, where the fatigue factors come into play, as well as the cell phone use and other things that are distractions to employees. Well, basically to conclude today's presentation, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this event. We'll go ahead and start with our Q&A portion. And let's see, let's see if we have any questions come in yet. Okay. Someone has said that they're surprised to see that cell phones has such a low percentage of the preventable collisions. Does that mean it's not as an important issue?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I definitely wouldn't want to mislead people on that topic. So it absolutely is an important issue. What it really says is, although it doesn't happen quite as often, when it does happen, it's really severe. So I think one of the messages from what I was trying to communicate here is let's make sure we have a lot of focus on severity, not just frequency, and that is generally one of the higher severity types of incidences, so it's absolutely an important subject to put attention to within your fleet.
Okay, here's another one here. Does it make it more difficult for a company to defend themselves in civil court when it's been determined that their driver was not at fault, but there could have been something to prevent the crash, that the driver could have done to prevent the crash?
Hey, Scott, maybe that's being that you're with a company. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. It is, we find a lot of times the use of DriveCam, and I'll throw this out there, it's no company secret. Our drivers on the cell phone texting or driving, and a crash occurs, maybe not our fault. We had a really bad one in Arkansas, interstate, one of our roll-off drivers, tire blows, car cuts in front of our truck, and it resulted in a fatality. That being said, when we go back and look at the drive cam, what is our driver doing? Our driver is texting. You know, the opportunity for us there was, yes, we have some culpability, because if we were paying attention and not texting, maybe we could have reduced speed, and just like you have alluded to a lot, Dale, you know, reduce the severity and the risk or severity of the crash. We have a very strict policy as waste management. We have the evaluators for DriveCam look at our clips and evaluate them. Drivers are disciplined and terminated for 4 cell phone clips within a 12-month period. And why do we do that? Just to reduce the risk and the liability on our company. I hope that answers the question. If not, please prompt more questions, and I'll try to help out and answer.
Yeah, and I'll just maybe add a little bit to that. I mean, this is one that's, you know, as we all know, once you get in the courtroom, you know, things can be a two-edged sword. So a company with a process of not just determining who is at fault, but also looking at preventability, that is discoverable generally. And so there is the potential that a plaintiff attorney trying to skew that to misrepresent what it's really saying, and that's where it's important for your attorney and of course, whoever's representing a company on behalf of the case. It's important for them to do a good job of explaining the difference between a determination of preventable, non-preventable versus at fault. So that's one piece of it. And I think the other piece is, if we really do a good job of identifying preventable and non-preventable and then looking at the root cause, well, ultimately what that is going to do is help us to drive the risk out of our fleets and reduce crashes altogether, and that's the biggest benefit of all.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to that also. When it comes from a like a global corporate perspective, is if you have policies in place that identify that you're utilizing a system like this for preventable and non-preventable crashes for coaching opportunities, and you regularly and consistently adhere to your policy practices, which is you have a coaching session with the employees to determine what could they have done differently, what could have been done differently in that crash that could have prevented, you know, a future occurrence of that. And if you're consistently administering training for that, that's also something that could be administered or identified in court, that you utilize these processes consistently across your system.
Right, right.
And just to add to that, not to continue to beat it up, but over our market area, which is about 1,600 vehicles, I can tell you we are averaging less than 1 cell phone clip per day. So by having the tool of DriveCam, along with the policies and the processes in place to educate, train, and coach our employees, it has really driven our distracted driving and cell phone use down. So you figure if we're putting 1,600 trucks a day on the road just in our market area, we're getting less than 1 cell phone clip a day. Not saying that they're not using it, but we have really driven the distracted driving and cell phone use down by enforcing it and having the procedures in place.
Okay, we have another question come in, which is, this is actually a good question, is what is the time requirement for a manager when dealing with something like a drive cam video to make it worthwhile?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably Scott and I can perhaps respond from slightly different seats in it. So ours is kind of what we hear from our customers, and he can tell you probably their firsthand experience. So it is far less than people expect. So what you end up with is typically somewhere around 10% of the drivers are really creating, they're the ones that are the risky drivers, a low percentage, and they're triggering the video clips that are revealing behaviors that need to be coached on. So first of all, there's just a small percentage of the drivers that need to be tended to at any given moment. And then also, that one driver usually has multiple clips, so you can bring in one time and in a 10 or 15-minute meeting, kind of share the key issues that are revealed through the video, share the video, talk to that driver about what needs to be done, and then send them, essentially send them back on their way. So it is, with most of our managers, and of course it depends on how many drivers they're assigned to, but it's typically something in the neighborhood of 30 or 40 minutes a week of time engagement in this once they're kind of up and running with the program after a few weeks. Scott, if you want to kind of add, from your perspective, we're actually using the program?
Sure, absolutely. I 100% agree with Dell's representation there. I don't know, maybe was the question, if the other side of that is how long does it take for us to get a driver in, maybe. Our company policy is we want to get that event coached as soon as possible. We have a policy of 24 hours. So if a driver has a coachable event and it comes in, we want to get that event coached within 24 hours. It does us no good to coach an event for a rolling stop or a traffic violation or a near collision 10 days down the road. And what we find is if you do not get that event coached and get out in front of that employee and sit down and show this with the employee, you will find the employee has the same exact event 4 or 5 times before you can get the first one coached. So how good is our tool if we're not getting out in front of the employees within a reasonable amount of time? And our reasonable amount of time for our company is 24 hours. We want to get it coached if possible.
And of course, leaving a behavior uncorrected. In other words, kind of, I think one of the questions here is, can I afford the time to do a program like this? And again, it's far less than people would anticipate. But the alternative is to allow behaviors to continue. And how much time is consumed once a collision occurs? It can be pretty massive.
It is, and again, I'll piggyback on that. I do not have worked for DriveCam, but I would tell you this much: it is invaluable, and the amount of coaching opportunities that arise out of this, I do not think that any corporate executive is going to put a time. I'm sorry, my manager does not have 20 minutes, 30 minutes a week to spend on this when they see the benefits of it. You will have your companies find time for you, I assure you. Us having 25,000 cameras, if we broke it down by the minutes that our management spends on it, it might be astonishing. But that being said, it is driving our safety culture, and you cannot put a price on that time that you spend with the driver to correct the behaviors.
Mm-hmm. We have another question comes in, is there a percentage that you can say DriveCam has helped liability in claim litigation? In other words, with the use of footage DriveCam, this has helped companies dispute frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah, don't have a percentage simply because we don't always hear from our customers about that, so it's really more anecdotal, Tony. But there is, in the non-video world, large heavy vehicle going down the road, accident occurs, almost always, and I don't know what the number is, pick a number, 80, 90% of the time, they initially try and blame the person driving the heavier vehicle. And a significant portion of those, absent hard facts, you've got one person that says, I did this, and the other person saying, no, you didn't, you did that. And a lot of times that waste company with the heavy vehicle is the loser on that. So what we do hear from our customers with having the video is that it's become a tool where they can now defend, I'll call it kind of those gray area claims, the ones where without video they really weren't sure. They're now able to successfully defend those and in most cases push the entire cost the other direction or get a fair kind of sharing of the cost in other situations. So it's a significant number, but I don't know the exact one because they don't always report it to us.
And here's two questions here that are kind of piggyback to each other, which this is a question I've had for a long time as well, which is how do you get past the union issues in regards to, well, I'm going to frame it up two ways. One is with the use of dry cam and the coaching process, and the other one is in regards to phone use clips. So I guess that's meaning that the you have union issues where the person's on the cell phone and you're coaching them because they're using their phone.
Yeah, I'll speak maybe at generalities, and then Scott, if you have any union locations, you can maybe piggyback on what I'll say here. So with unions, I mean, you know the nature of unions, they tend to be resistant to change. So there's definitely a process. I mean, the right way to do with it is to meet with that union leadership in advance of deploying the technology and having a pretty thorough session to explain to them how it all works, why you're doing what you're doing, and just as importantly, how it benefits their members. And the key phrase here that really no union can effectively say no to is the fact that this will protect their members and make them safer. And safety is that's kind of the trump word. In any contract, companies have the ability to use their discretion in terms of safety tools and things like that. So that's a key facet of it, but always try and work with the union and have heavy communication. They may still not like the concept at first, but if you've communicated to them, you've been very transparent about it, in fairly short order, they usually come to accept it, and their only real issue then is whether or not, is kind of around the discipline side. And perhaps, Tony, maybe that's where the cell phone question is coming in, perhaps?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, that's my guess, too. So it would be very common with a union shop and getting a program like DriveCam, getting a in-cab video technology, but bringing that in. It would be very common for one of our clients to, again, explain the program to the union, explain the program to the drivers, explain the rules that, yes, we have a policy of no handheld cell phone, and that's zero tolerance, and that hasn't changed. But we know this is going to take a little getting used to, so for the first 30 days, we'll have a grace period where if we see you on the phone in one of the videos, we're going to bring you in and we're going to talk to you, but we're not going to invoke our policy for the first 30 days. We're going to give you a little bit of time to adjust and change your behavior. So that would be commonly how I see our clients dealing with that specific issue. How about yourself, Scott?
Okay, in our market area, we do have, in the Western Pennsylvania section of the market, we do have union sites. How we dealt with it was just what you said, Bill. It is a safety issue. Why did we put our cameras in? We didn't put our cameras in to catch our employees doing anything. We put our cameras in to drive safe behavior and also to protect our company. So how we handle that is in the union contract. So as we're going around, and for those of you who don't know, the dashboard allows me to select videos from our entire company and put into a training file. So we have said, we will not put any videos without written permission from the union's representative. We will not show them outside of the union shop. And the second one is the unions have a little bit different disciplinary action if they are caught on cell phones, and that was negotiated between Waste Management and their union contract. So the non-union sites have a strict 4 cell phone violations, and then the unions have a little different, they work on a point thing. But what it was for us was basically setting down, just as Dell alluded to, and saying, look, this is a safety. It's going to protect your member. and it's going to drive the safe culture that we at Waste Management demand. If you guys want to continue to have a union shop and work with Waste Management, we're going to negotiate that in your contract, and there really wasn't any pushback. I'll be honest with you, for us, because we are a company that has part union and part non-union employees. So you just have to sit down and work with your union reps, and you may have to give a little bit of give and take, probably much like every rule that you invoke on any union shop.
Yeah, and quite honestly, my experience in this area with unions in the past when it comes to systems like this is they start looking at that behavior modification in regards to productivity and work rates, where you're not using the system to determine what the average work rate is and try to increase their work rate based on the utilization of the system. But again, like you said, it's a matter of sitting down and talking through it with the contract, or with the collective bargaining agreement. Another question here, so then it goes back to that legal claims, which is has a claim settlement for which a waste driver was determined at fault ever increased due to the video being available? You know, showing the driver's actions were basically fault or preventable. Has the claim increased because of that?
That's a really good question. So we have now, what, 1,400 customers. I think in the waste industry, about 50,000 vehicles, and I forgot the number, over 350,000 vehicles total. So just about every one of our companies, when they originally were considering a in-cab video solution, they asked that exact same question. And the question was simply, hey, by having the video, if that video shows that we are at fault, are we at risk of having a higher judgment than if we had no video at all? And the answer to that, quite frankly, is maybe. But every one of our customers made the decision because they kind of weighed all the positive and negatives. And here's how it kind of comes out. First of all, as Scott had described, fundamentally, this is a tool that allows companies like Waste Management to improve their drivers so that accident never happened. And that's the best way to lower litigation costs, is not even have that crash, obviously. So that's an important part of kind of that evaluation. And then another thing that our clients tell us is that, hey, Dell, at the end of the day, we just want to know what happened. If it's our fault, we'll reach out to the other party and as quickly as possible write them a check and just be done with it. And many times they report that because we knew so quickly, we were able to track down the other party and pay them before an attorney even showed up. And also by being able to settle quickly, as you know, if litigation is allowed to, the time is allowed to extend, that's the meter ticking. That's the thing that really runs up the cost. So the claims cases get closed a lot quicker. But I'm not going to kid you. Could there potentially be an incident where the video showed something egregious by the party in the video and it allowed the plaintiff attorney to leverage it for a little bigger settlement? That's a possibility. It's just the pluses outweigh the negatives in our customers' eyes.
Okay. Trying to see, we got about 5 more minutes here and close out the hour. See if we have any more questions come in here. Actually, it's kind of an interesting question. You know, we've been considering developing a policy against eating and drinking in our trucks. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Scott, what does Waste Management do on that?
Well, you're very familiar with our policy. It is not, we do not allow that to occur simply because we want our drivers focused with 2 hands on the wheel driving down the roadway. That being said, we know for our employees' health, they need to have nutrition and hydrate, but we encourage them to pull off the side of the road and take care of that and eat and refresh themselves, because we know, and especially in the waste industry, you know, these guys are out on rear load trucks pulling cans all day long in 100-degree weather. To think that they're not going to do it would probably be a little short-sighted on our behalf, but we do not encourage it at all, and we do have it identified as one of the coachable behaviors from DriveCam. So I hope that maybe answers the question for Waste Management.
Yeah, and then on a broader view, so I kind of get get a look-see into a lot of different waste industry companies' policies on that. And I think it's a mix. Some are much like Scott in waste management, and there's others that don't have any don't really address it at all. And then there's others that have kind of a more flexible thing. What they really say is they kind of set guidelines for doing it safely. In other words, we recommend that you don't do it while the vehicle's in motion or anything. Don't be eating or drinking in a way that would obstruct your ability to safely operate the vehicle. And then if they see a video clip where, let's say the driver is going down the road and trying to eat a salad, you know, one hand's holding the bowl and the other's got a fork in his hand, those sorts of things where there's clearly no way they can safely operate the vehicle, they'll choose to coach them on those sorts. So I think it's quite a bit all over the map on that one in terms of different companies' policies.
Yeah, and to both of the Dell and to Scott's point too, when you write a policy for this, whether it's for distracted driving, cell phone use, eating or drinking while operating the equipment, your company needs to manage to and hold folks accountable to that policy consistently. You have to audit to it as well. So you know, using a system like this to audit the drivers to make sure that they are abiding by the policy rules and stipulations, but also consistently administering the disciplinary actions as per the policy. Failure to do so will end up leading yourself in court, and the policy won't mean a thing. And you'll end up being held accountable for all that. But basically, our time is kind of up today. We basically concluded the presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this opportunity to hear some solutions to these situations. If any of you have any additional questions or comments following this call, you can reach out to me, send me an email, or contact Megan Passenger, and Passenger is spelled P-A-S-S-I-N-G-E-R. So it's M-P-A-S-S-I-N-G-E-R at wasteandrecycling.org, or you can reach me, A. Hargis, at wasteandrecycling.org. Again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dell, and thank you, Scott, for attending and providing such, such great information for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.